Don't be like me and just walk away in the middle of a conversation. Hello, Ego Diana here. Welcome back to EGO Initiative, where we create self-care systems to help us live our best lives and support our communities without sacrificing our health. Happy Wellness Wednesday, you all. In today's Wellness Wednesday chat, I'm going to be talking about boundaries. I don't know what your boundaries are, how to set them, communicate them effectively with other people, and making sure that you honor your boundaries. I know I talked about this with Prince in the previous video about practicing self-care in community, but I wanted to dive a little bit deeper in terms of setting personal boundaries and what that looks like in practice. I found that a lot of the conversations I was having around what people were struggling with when it came to prioritizing their wellness had a lot to do with boundaries. Now, the one big question that I get asked very often, and Prince actually asked me in the video, was how do you know what your boundaries are? Boundaries is another word that is thrown around in the wellness community. Honor your boundaries, have boundaries, but a lot of people don't really know what that means, and they don't know when people are in fact crossing their boundaries. And so that is part of what I want to touch on today as well. As you all know, before I utilize words, I like to know what they mean, and then I create my own definition. The definition of boundary is simply a line that marks the limits of an area, subject, or an activity. As much as boundaries are limits in the general definition, I like to define a boundary as an invitation. So my definition of a boundary is an invitation into your space within which others can experience you with certain guidelines. So what does that actually mean? Think about it like a house. You're inviting someone into your home and you expect that people are going to respect the rules of your house. If you got some manners whenever you walk into a home, you know, it's common practice to take off your shoes. And so think of boundaries in that way, where I'm inviting you into my home, into my space. I'm inviting you to be in community with me, to experience me, but I also have some ground rules that you have to abide to in order to engage with me and to communicate with me. And so that's simply what boundaries mean for me, and it's not far off from what the definition is really. A lot of people confuse boundaries and barriers, which is something I've talked about a lot on Instagram, is that barriers actually push people out. Boundaries for me are an invitation. You can be in this space with me, but you have to respect the rules. So now I'm going to share with you 4 tips on how to set and effectively communicate your boundaries, especially if it's not something that you've done in the past and it's a new boundary that you have found and you want to set within a community or with another person. First tip that I want to share with you all is, of course, know yourself. Self-awareness is key whenever you're making any sort of behavioral changes or growth, or just for life in general. You need to know who you are, what you like, what you dislike, what you want and what you don't want. A lot of people focus more on what they dislike or what they don't want, but they don't really know what they want. And so it's really important that in the knowing the things that you don't really like, knowing the things that you like, so that you are able to figure out exactly what things need to be a part of your guidelines within your boundaries. For instance, a new boundary that I have set with the people who communicate with me, and this was many years ago. When I was younger, I used to cuss a lot. That was just my way of communicating, I guess. But as I got older, I realized that I didn't actually enjoy cussing as much as I thought I did. And I usually would have a visceral reaction sometimes when people cuss at me. And so I thought to myself, why would I want to cuss at other people? And why would I want to use that language? That became a boundary of mine. And as I share more of the tips, I will break down what that looks like in terms of what I have done when I realized that that was a boundary of mine. The next tip is to call out the behavior and not the person, and also offer an alternative. Just because I realized that I didn't want to cuss anymore, I wasn't going to start calling people out and being like, you're a terrible person because you cuss. However, whenever people were cussing around me, particularly if I was in conversation with somebody, I would say, do you mind not cussing? Actually, it makes me uncomfortable. Or you could say, can we talk about something else? Can we go somewhere else? And so that's offering an alternative. So not restricting them, so to speak, in that moment. If there's someone who is just like, that's just how I talk, because that was definitely the excuse I used to give people. That is just who I am. time. That's just how I talk. But you don't want people to feel some type of way, especially if they're people that you care about or your loved ones. Yes, you need to let them know what you are okay and not okay with. However, you want to do it in a way where you are also offering them an alternative for how to be in community with you in that moment. Don't be like me and just walk away in the middle of a conversation. That's what I used to do. Now that I've grown a little bit more and I've learned a little bit more about who I am and how I want to show up in the world, I'm able to communicate when things are not to my liking or when things don't really follow my guideline, especially if I invited someone into my space. It is my right to say what I am comfortable and not comfortable with. The third thing is to be clear on your consequences. What does it look like when people don't follow the rules? Because if you don't really think about what the consequences are, you just let people cross your boundaries, so to speak, over and over again, then it technically isn't really a boundary if people are actually able to cross it. And so you want to think about what the consequences are. Now, I don't mean consequence in a negative tone, but what are you going to do when people no longer or are refusing to honor your boundaries? You have a few options. You can decide not to be in community with that person anymore. I will excuse myself from the situation. And the more you do that, the more they will know, okay, maybe this is not something that they enjoy. For example, in one of the spaces I work at while I'm in school, when people are around me, it kind of has to do with the way that I carry myself. People just assume that when they cuss, it makes me uncomfortable. Again, I have a visceral reaction when people cuss around me, or I just look towards them, letting them know that that's not something that I'm okay with, and then they usually apologize. That's kind of an example of a small consequence. And then there are times when I tell them, I don't appreciate when you speak to me in that way, or people cuss around me. And so they have the option to either continue doing that, or I would just end the conversation and I would walk away because I've already given them that warning. You have to think about what it looks like for when people do cross your boundaries, either when they don't know what your boundary was to begin with, or they do and they continue to blatantly cross those boundaries. So you have to decide what that looks like. I also think about what my boundaries are. Whenever I'm in a new space, I remind myself, okay, this is not my personal space. However, I still have a right to what my boundaries are. And so I have to think about what it looks like when people will cross my boundaries in different spaces. And the final thing, of course, is to be kind and respectful. You want to be able to really speak to people how you would like to be spoken to, especially if you didn't realize it was a boundary of theirs, you didn't realize you had crossed a boundary. You don't want to be yelled at if you cross someone's boundary that you weren't aware of to begin with. So it's important to be respectful and kind when you are doing it. A lot of the times I like to use the sandwich example of, doing a compliment and then calling out the behavior and then offering the alternative. An example would be if I'm speaking to someone and they're cussing, I would say, I really love the conversation that we're having right now. However, I don't really enjoy when people are cussing. And so if you can help it, I would prefer that you either omit the words or use a different word. It's really hard for people, especially people who are closest to you, who know you a particular type of way. When you are changing, it's hard for them as well. And so you got to be mindful of these things. And if you're introducing new things like setting boundaries around, hey, I'm going to think about taking care of myself first before I help you out. So you have to be mindful of how you're communicating that, because that technically doesn't sound good to anyone. Boundaries are really tricky for folks to adhere to, especially if it's something new that you are trying out or something new that you are being intentional about. I also suggest that you practice boundaries with yourself. Going back to the example of people cussing, because I'm saying that I don't like when people cuss, I think about the music that I'm listening to. There's some cussing in it. I try to find a clean version of the song, or I just don't listen to it at all. I skip the song. So that's me practicing my own boundaries with myself, because how can I say I don't enjoy cussing, but I'm listening to music and I'm watching movies and all that stuff that have profanity in it? And in this day and age, you can't really avoid it. So I think about, is this a song that I actually really like? Am I going to continue listening to it? Can I find a clean version of it? Or am I just going to give up on this song? And so those are the ways that you can practice your own boundaries on yourself. Honor your boundaries with yourself, because you can't expect other people to honor your boundaries if you don't even honor your own boundaries. And so I would suggest, if this is something new that you're trying out, make sure that you practice with yourself first. Make sure that you're keeping your word to yourself first. And then when you're thinking about the consequences, consequences? What is it going to look like when you cross your own boundaries as well? I hope that this supported you all today and that you can take some of these tips into your daily lives. Thank you all so much for those who are a part of the tribe already. I really appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this content, please go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit the notification bell so that you get notified when I post some more of these videos. All that being said, if you just want to be a part of the tribe, all you got to do is subscribe, pull up a seat, make sure that you are staying hydrated. Talk to y'all real soon. Peace and love.